Hi, I'm Steve Saint. 60 years ago, right now, God began writing a story that deeply, deeply impacted my life, as well as that of 4 other families and hundreds of thousands of people around the world. You know, Psalm 145:4 says about God's stories, "Generation after generation stands in awe of your work. Each one tells stories of your mighty acts." The story that God started writing 60 years ago was a story about my dad, Nate Saint, and 4 of his friends, Jim Elliott, Roger Udarian, Pete Fleming, and Ed McCulley, had decided to try to make contact with a really violent tribe of Indians living down in the Ecuadorian Amazon. These people had been harassed by the Shell Oil Company and had been killing oil company employees, trying to keep those employees from entering into their territory. The Shell Oil Company had gone to the Ecuadorian government and convinced them that if they wanted the Shell Oil Company to find oil, that together they had to get rid of this problem. So Dad and his friends decided to try to make a friendly contact, before efforts were made to try to wipe this small tribe of violent people out. In the process, Dad and his friends were killed, but that's only the beginning of the story. A few years ago, I was traveling with a man that we call Grandfather Minkai, one of the members of the tribe that killed Dad and his friends. And while we were traveling and speaking with Stephen Curtis Chapman, a contemporary Christian musician, a journalist from USA Today gave me a call and said, I'd like to interview you. But then he said, but first I want to ask you some questions. A USA Today editor, when he was interviewing us, said, I can understand possibly forgiving the man who killed your father, but he said, but loving him? That seems almost morbid. And it would be if it wasn't true. But the answer to why and how something like this can happen is really very simple. It's God's grace and the power of His Word. My dad and his 4 friends were willing to die rather than to kill the Waodani. When they were attacked, they all had guns and the Waodani had spears. So I figured as a little boy, well, my dad must have loved the Waodani. And then after Dad was killed, every night when we'd meet for family devotions, my mom would pray for those people that had just brutally killed my dad and ruined my life. And then, a couple of years later, Mom told me that my Aunt Rachel, who was like a second mother, my dad's sister, and Aunt Betty, who wasn't really my blood relation, but called her Aunt Betty anyway, Aunt Betty Elliott, that the 2 of them were going to go in and try to live with the same people that had just killed Dad and Roger and Pete and Ed and Jim. And I thought, what a dumb thing to do. They'll just kill Aunt Rachel and Aunt Betty too. But Aunt Rachel and Aunt Betty went in and they weren't killed. But I knew that Aunt Rachel loved those people enough that she was willing to die for them. By the time I met them a couple of years later, I was convinced that these were the most special people on earth. I mean, why would my dad and his friends be willing to risk their lives and then not try to defend themselves when they were attacked? Why would my mom go on praying for them? And why would Aunt Rachel be willing to risk her life unless these were really, really special people? I thought as my conversation with the journalist was winding down, I thought, there's an old saying, hurt people hurt people. Well, maybe it's also true that forgiven people learn to forgive people. There's a verse in 2 Corinthians that I thought of too, and it made me feel bad because that journalist really wanted to know if this man that I was traveling with and rooming with and that I loved was the same man who had killed my dad and his 4 friends. And I had said yes, but I had misled him. He looked like the same man, and he had the same general personality, but he wasn't the same man. Let me explain. It says in 2 Corinthians 5:17 through 20, it starts out this way: if anyone is in Christ, or our young people might say into Christ, if anyone is into Christ, he is a new creature. Instead of going back and finishing the verses in regular English, let me try it. I'm going to read it to you in Hawaiian Pidgin, a language which you'll understand, although you probably have never read it. In Hawaiian Pidgin, 2 Corinthians 5:17 through 20 says, "That's why whoever stay tight with Christ, they one new kind of guy." This is a real language. "The old things no stay no more. Look, the new things when come. All that stuff it come from God. He when bring us back the same side with him because of what Christ when do. And now he tell us for work so the other people can come back together with him too." That's our objective. If you're a Christ follower, that is our commission from Christ. We were brought back the same side with God after we had strayed. And now our objective should be to try to bring other people back the same side with Christ. Oh, I don't mean forcibly, but to share the good news, the gospel with them, so that they have a choice to live peaceably with God. Grandfather Minkai has told me a number of times, and others of the men who killed Dad and Roger and Pete and Ed and Jim, after they became Christ followers, and don't get me wrong, not the whole tribe became Christ followers, but when those people who did became Christ followers, they actually began teaching me, when I was living with Aunt Rachel, how to become a Christ follower. It really is true. If anyone is in Christ, they become a new kind of guy.